evening? All right, good, yay. Well, thank y'all so much for having me tonight, and thank you so much to Linnell for inviting me. And I leaned over and I told her, I was like, wow, that was a lot that you said that I have to live up to now. So we're gonna pray, and then we're gonna get started. So let's pray. Father, thank you that you are great, and thank you that you are mighty, and Lord, you are Lord. And Father, tonight as we gather in this room, Jesus, may it be your name and your name alone that's exalted, Lord God. Father, I do pray and ask that as you are the author of relationships, that you would cultivate relationships among these women tonight, Lord. Father, may you be lifted on high. I pray and I ask that, Father, that you would hide me behind your cross, Lord God, and it would be completely and totally about you this evening. Lord Jesus, we love you and we thank you. It's in your holy and precious name that we pray. Amen. All right, well tonight, what I've titled this is Cultivating Women as Disciple Makers, which sounds really formal, I now realize. But we're going to hopefully dig a little bit out of that topic. And I apologize, I think I'm the one giving the feedback on this microphone, and it's actually my breathing. So if that stops, it means that I'm about to pass out. So it's nothing with the sound booth. And I do want to say, on a side note, I want to thank all the people that are running the AV tonight, and I want to thank all the women that came and have been working all day and for months, actually, to prepare for this evening. They deserve a round of applause. Because I can honestly say, as someone that coordinates events like this in North Carolina, it's a lot of hard work. A lot of times it goes unnoticed, and people want to be unnoticed about it. But still, they need to be applauded. So thank you all to all the women that did table decorations, that did everything, led in worship tonight, everything. So, okay, so my question for you ladies this evening is, what does it mean to have a lifestyle of disciple making? And you might wonder, like, what is even disciple making? And we'll talk a little bit more about that tonight. But I wanted to, while you're thinking on that, I want to show these pictures up here. How many of you watched the Olympics? Okay, some whoops and some, because it was all that was on for like 16 days straight. If you deviated from NBC, I don't know what you watched at all. But one of the things that really intrigued me a whole lot, because I am an athletic Olympics junkie. At work, nobody bothered to look at anything because I would just tell them, because I had running on the background of my laptop in my office, NBCOlympics.com, which I could watch anything I wanted. And I wasn't watching because I was working, but I was listening, so I knew everything that happened in real time. And one of the things that fascinated me the most was the gymnastics team, the women's gymnastics team. And I was not a gymnast growing up. My mom was. She actually trained for the Olympics and did not make the Olympic team. But I just love watching these people fly through the air like it's nothing at all. And, you know, it's so weird. But this year's team was very unique because their national team coach, Marta Caroli, who's been around for a long time, this was her last Olympic team to coach. And you see pictures up here of the 5 girls who ranged in age from 16, the youngest being Lori Hernandez from New Jersey, and Allie Raisman, who was like the veteran of the team. She's 22 from Boston. Y'all, I know all about these people. I seriously do. Anyway, but Marta Caroli, you have these young women, but Marta Caroli is their 73-year-old, Hungarian-born, from Romania, national team coordinator. And this was her 11th squad to coach. And it's really interesting because if you've heard these girls talk about Marta, they're like, she's a perfectionist, you don't want to get on her bad side. When you go to the famed Caroli Ranch down around Houston, Texas, if she says to be there at 12:20 for lunch, if you are still there at like 12:10, but you're the last one there, you're considered late. They said she has just drilled into us all these things. But at the end of the team competition, when the U.S. won the gold, they told her, they said, we have named our team the Final Five. And that was in your honor. Well, partly in her honor, because they were her last squad to coach, and they would be the last 5 to actually be a part of an Olympic team, because in 2020 they go to 4 that will compete for each country. And this lady, this woman who was much older than they were, broke down in tears. And she was not a woman that would do that kind of thing. And I thought, that's pretty cool to think about. Here they connected through gymnastics, these young women, and this older lady in her 70s have completely connected and bonded over gymnastics. And they call her the legacy leaver. So I've thought about that, and I'll come back to that in a little bit, but I want to talk about tonight, what is a lifestyle? I was thinking about this on the plane earlier today, and kind of some of the language and lingo that we use nowadays. Sometimes we might think, like, what are the rhythms of our life? Which I just think sounds so out there, kind of, and I think it's the word rhythm, but really, what's the pattern of your life? Think about your day to day. What do you do every single day? For some of you, your 2 days in a week may not look the same. You may not have 2 of those same looking days. I know for me, I kind of do. I get up in the morning. I have my quiet time. I don't eat breakfast at home. I take it with me every single morning. I go to work. I get there at 7:15. Every single morning, I go and I get hot water from the machine to put in my little cup with oatmeal. And I go up to my desk, and as I'm checking emails, I eat my oatmeal at my desk. It's really sad. My 5 days a week, it does not change. And I get up early in the morning. You would think I'd eat at my house, but I don't. I eat at my desk at work. But anyway, I eat my oatmeal. I talk with one of the women that I work with around 8 o'clock. Everybody else gets there. And I go throughout my morning. At lunchtime, I usually sit with the same people, and usually, because like Linnell said earlier, I crochet. I try to make the most of every opportunity. So at lunch, like, I sit and talk and crochet and eat, because I'm really like a 93-year-old woman. Anyway, and then I go work in the afternoon, and I go to the gym, and I run, and I come home, and I make a couple phone calls. That's my 5 days a week. But I encounter several different people during those 5 days a week. But that's my pattern, or my rhythm of life. Yours may look very different. You may have children. There may be people that you interact with on your street. You may have a community group coming to Flourish on Monday nights, the first Monday night of each month. That may be part of your, or today's Tuesday. It just feels like Monday because yesterday was Labor Day. At least I caught that myself, as opposed to people being like, she doesn't know what day of the week it is. I do. Anyway, that may be part of your rhythm during the school year. But how are you using your lifestyle or your rhythm or your pattern to make disciples among the women that are around you? A lifestyle, as the dictionary.com defines it, is it's the habits, the attitudes, the tastes, the moral standards, the economic level, or etc., that constitute the mode of living of an individual or a group. So it's kind of just what you do. But to have a lifestyle of discipling means we make it a habit to disciple women around us as we seek to point them to the Father. I'm going to tell a quick story. I will come back to it. I know I keep saying I'll come back to it, but I promise. Last year around this time, last year was a really hard year in my life. I had 3 people that were close to me that all passed away. One of those was my grandmother, and that happened very unexpectedly. Another was one of my professors from seminary that I was a teaching assistant for, and he had Lou Gehrig's disease, and he passed away. But the third was a lady that passed away a year ago last week, and her name was Dr. Juana Ann Fort. And Dr. Juana Ann and her husband, the late Dr. Giles Fort, were pioneer medical missionaries to Zimbabwe. And they served in Zimbabwe back when it was Rhodesia in the early 1950s into the mid-1980s. And when Dr. Juana Ann passed away last year, she was 91 years old. However, she was a lady that impacted my life greatly, and it was simply because she and I got put next to each other on a bus. Back in 2002, when I was a seminary student at Southwestern Seminary, I was also an intern at my home church, First Baptist Dallas. And Billy Graham had come to the DFW Metroplex to preach a crusade. And so First Dallas had chartered all these buses to go to the crusades. because the Christians were going to go to the Crusades, the evangelistic Crusades, which at the time I never thought of. Now I'm like, that doesn't make sense, but whatever. Anyway, so I remember there was one Thursday night. It was the first night of the Crusade, and I was running late. And I'm not typically somebody that runs late, but I was running late that night. And when I got on the bus, there was one seat left, and it was next to this older lady that I asked her, I said, can I sit here? And she was like, I guess. And I was like, okay, great, you know. So I sat down, and I was sitting there, and I'm kind of in mode of, okay, we're late, this is what I did not get done, this is what I have to do when I get home, you know, that kind of thing. Well, she starts asking me all kinds of questions, just what's your name is how we started, and just different questions about like, well, what do you do, and all kinds of things like that. And so we talked the entire way from downtown Dallas to the old Texas Stadium in Irving, Texas, which no longer exists. And we were stuck in traffic, so it took probably about an hour and 15 minutes to go 15 miles. But that's the rhythm of life in Dallas, Texas. So we got there, and I got off the bus, and I remember she kind of grabbed my arm, and she was, come on, you're gonna come with me. And I was like, okay. So I follow her, and at the time I had not a clue she was 78 years old, because she took off like a rocket around this stadium, and I am like having trouble keeping up with her. She was like, this is where we're gonna sit. And I mean, she had everything all mapped out. But from that encounter, where this lady took an interest in me, where at the time I really didn't have an interest in having a friendship with her, bloomed a friendship in a disciple-making relationship that a good 50-something years apart didn't look possible, but it was. Because her rhythm of life was to make disciples and to be about disciple-making wherever she went. And you know what? She followed Jesus' rhythm of life. If you look in Scripture, Jesus modeled disciple-making as a lifestyle. Somebody tell me, how many disciples did Jesus have? Okay, that wasn't a confident, but it was 12, correct? Okay, Jesus had 12 disciples, but how many of those did he invest in intentionally? There were 3. Who was in the garden with Jesus? Peter, James, and John. Who was with Jesus at the Transfiguration? Peter, James, and John. Who was with Jesus when Peter's mother-in-law was sick? It's the same 3. Okay, Peter, James, and John. We see a pattern here? Yeah. Jesus took those 3 disciples with him at some very critical and very crucial moments in his life and in his ministry. But he had 12 disciples. Doesn't mean that he loved the other 9 any less, but he spent time investing in those 3. And if you recognize those 3, Peter, James, and John, they were some of the founding fathers of the early church. Jesus spent quite a bit of time with them. But how did he disciple? As he was going about his rhythm of life, he used all these moments that happened to invest in these men. He didn't say, Tuesday at 8 o'clock in the evening, that's when we're going to sit down and I'm going to make disciples of you. Did he? No, not at all. It was as he lived his life and as they lived their lives. But he brought them along to what he was doing. Paul modeled this as well, taking after the example of the Lord. I love the Apostle Paul. I think looking in Scripture, you see somebody with the personality of a bulldog that's just sort of like, we're going to get this done. But Paul modeled that as well. He was constantly bringing men alongside him and discipling them in the things of God and then letting them loose to go and to serve the Lord and to disciple others. I think about in Acts 16. In Acts 16, you see where the Apostle Paul, he and Silas and Luke are traveling about. And they come to Derbe and they meet Timothy. Timothy was a young man. Timothy was 17. He had a mother who was a believer. He had a grandmother who was a believer. His father was Greek, so not a believer. But Timothy told him, you come with us. And so Timothy went with Paul and Silas and Luke, the author of the book of Acts. And they go to a place called Philippi, where they meet a woman named Lydia. And Lydia was with a group of people down by a riverbank, and they were praying and singing out praises to the Lord. And the Lord drew her to himself, and she was converted there. And that was the birth of that church at Philippi, the same church that received the letter of Philippians, of what we know it now as Philippians. But it was there that we see a lot of things happen to the Apostle Paul. And here's Timothy, this young man, that it would be so easy to shield him from those things. But Paul was like, nope, I'm going to show you what it means to follow after the Lord and follow after the Lord faithfully. Because it was in that same place at that same time that Paul, Silas, Luke, and Timothy were preaching the Word of God. And there was a slave girl that came to Christ. Her masters didn't like it at all because it meant that they lost some money because she had demons in her. And so they were arrested. Paul and Silas were. They were arrested. They were thrown into prison. And you can read all about this in Acts 16. They were thrown into prison, and Paul and Silas are praising God in prison after they've been beaten and flogged. And there's an earthquake. The prison walls the doors are opened, and no one leaves because they're all listening. But the jailer is about to kill himself because he's like, if they're gone, I'm dead anyway. I might as well do it myself. But Paul calls out to him and he said, do yourself no harm. We're all here. And the jailer and his family come to know Christ later that evening. But yet that was something that Paul modeled for Timothy, this young man in the faith that Paul writes 2 letters to as he is in a Roman prison waiting to be executed, and Timothy is at a church called Ephesus, pastoring this church as a young man. And Paul writes to him, remember all the things that I taught you. You take those and you teach them to faithful young men who in turn will teach them to somebody else. And that's what disciple making is. But that happened as they lived life together. So on this next slide, you'll see where, and I have deviated from my slides, and I apologize for that, but you'll see where there is what does this look like in a model? Ideally, as we talk about building bridges and relationships, there's someone that's investing in somebody else. How many of you were able to name somebody that had invested in your life? One woman, at least one woman, that had invested in your life and had that special relationship with you as we did the icebreaker questions. Several of you, if not everybody in this room. But you know what's so cool is that as women invest in our lives, things of God, God tells us to go and to invest those in other people's lives. It's not just for us. It's a ripple effect on down the line. And so as women invest in our lives, we invest in other lives. As those women go out, they invest in other lives. And it's all for the kingdom and for the cause of Christ. I have several women that I think of that have invested in my life. And one of those special times for me was when I was in college. I went to the University of Texas at Austin, which is why I chose to wear burnt orange tonight, because we won double overtime Sunday night, and it was the best game ever. And now we're 11th in the country. And I say that with all humility. But anyway, when I was in college, I had some great women at this one church that I attended in Austin, Texas. And they were just godly women. But there was one in particular that stood out. And she was a pianist at our church. And she was an older lady. She wasn't old. I want to clarify this. Somebody said earlier at my table, and I won't point fingers, but they said earlier, they were like, I don't think 60 is old. Probably at one point when I was younger, I would have been like, 60 is pretty old. Now that I'm about to be 37, I'm like, that's a spring chicken. Like, there's a lot of years left, and I don't think of 60 as old at all. But this lady, her name was Joyce, and she was just this sweet, godly woman whose countenance just always reflected Christ. And just, Texas isn't really the South, but she was as Southern as you could be in Texas. She just was just this godly lady. And I just thought, I want to follow her the same way that she follows Christ. And one day I approached her and I asked her, I was like, would you consider, and I was 19, I said, would you consider mentoring me? And she was like, well, what does that mean? And I was like, I don't know, but that's like the word everybody's using. And she said, I remember what she said. She was like, I'll pray about it. She prayed for 4 months. You know what you do not do to an insecure college student that's 19-year-old? You don't pray for 4 months about yes or no. I mean, like, I was like, what? That I just, you know. But this lady invested in me for the kingdom and the cause of Christ. And I think about that, and I think about that relationship and how that taught me so much about disciple making, and how the Lord used that to teach me, good and bad, about what it meant to make disciples, and how He's been able to use that as I've been able to invest in other women's lives and teach as well. And so you never know what God is going to do. But you know, sometimes when we look at the different generations, we have some differing values. And there is a great book that's called Organic Mentoring. And this was a book that I taught from last year when Linnell was there. And it's a book by a lady named Sue Edwards and Barbara Newman. To kind of give context so you understand where all this is coming from, it's not just me putting stuff on a PowerPoint. Barbara Newman was a student at Dallas Theological Seminary in Dallas, Texas. And she did some research because she was like, I don't understand why it keeps coming up about generations. Why can't one generation of women connect with another generation of women? And you know what's so funny? I laugh about this as a side note, is that you never hear the men say this. It's always among women that it's like, how do we connect? You know, I mean, how do we make friends among women? You don't hear this from men at all. They're like, let's go build something. Okay, let's go, you know? But Barbara Newman, she wanted to investigate this. So what she did was she took a sampling of women and she called them moderns and postmoderns. And moderns would be what we would call Gen Xers, and I'm in that group, Gen Xers, baby boomers, the silent generation or GI generation, and they would be called moderns. And your postmoderns would be your millennials. So 35 and less would be your postmoderns, and 36 age and older are considered your your moderns. But one of the things that she found in her research is that there was some differences between the two classifications of women. And these were some of them. First, she found that postmodern women, they really, really value relationships. Everything is about relationships and community. Whereas with the modern women, it's a lot about individualism. I think about some of the young women that I work with at the convention who are postmodern. Y'all, they are all about the relationships. I mean, community is like every 5th word. You know, it's all about that. But with some of the postmodern or the modern women, they are very focused on what can I do by myself. And I think about this with my grandmother who passed away last year. Y'all, that lady was the definition of independent, and I loved my grandmother very much. But the last Christmas that she was alive was Christmas of 2014, and she had some health issues, some breathing issues then, and later we recognized that that was the beginning of some of the things that, that she was misdiagnosed with. But I'll never forget that Christmas, because my grandmother was struggling to get around and breathing and everything, and she didn't like for us to help her with dinner, anything. She's very independent. And I told her one day, I was like, you know what, we're gonna come and cook. She goes, no. And I was like, look, we can come and cook. I said, things need to be chopped. We're talking Christmas dinner. It wasn't just like a little lunch, it was Christmas dinner. I said, we can come and we can do all this. And she was like, okay. So I went home and I told my parents, I was like, we have to go to Mamaw's, we have to get this done, she needs this done and this done, and it was this whole long list of stuff. So we get over to my grandmother's the next night after my parents got off work and I was visiting them. We get over there and my mom's like, okay, Mama, what needs to be done? Because this was her mother-in-law. And my grandmother was like, just the broccoli and cheese needs to be mixed up. Y'all, there was a turkey that needed to be stuffed. There was like everything that needed to be chopped. She had done it during the day because she was so determined she was going to do it herself. She was worn out. And I'll never forget leaving there that night because my mom was like, I could have mixed that broccoli and cheese casserole before lunch, you know, Thanksgiving or Christmas lunch. I was like, there was so much more that needed to be done yesterday. But she was individual and very independent and gonna do it herself. Postmoderns really place a high value on education. They are highly educated individuals, and that is something that is of importance to them. Now your moderns, they really like structure, rules, and organization. And I'll tell you, sometimes I find myself kind of in one foot in one group and 1 foot in the other. And here's an example, and I told these women down here I'd embarrass them, and here it goes. I'm a fan of structure. I really like rules. I like things organized. While my postmodern friends are more organic, like it'll all come together. I'm like, it's not gonna come together. And like, it stresses me out to no end. But I really like rules and structure and stuff. And so I already knew about these little tent cards on the table and like what they were gonna be done and that kind of deal. And these sweet women down here, first time here, I didn't know this, first time here, they're like, we're gonna move over here. And I was like, no, you can't. And I followed them all the way up here because I was like, you can't move the cards like that. Linnell, I'm so sorry. Anyway, but I told them, thank you. But there's something about having rules and structure and having like a plan and a purpose. Next week, I lead a group to New York City for a mission trip. I have one woman on my team that she is a modern, and she's never been on a mission trip before. And y'all, she is wigging out because we don't know minute by minute what we're doing. And all I can think is, I used to be you on these trips, you know, but I'm not that way anymore. And I told her, like, it'll all come together, I promise. And she's like, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah. And it's not good because she's my boss's wife. And so I'm like, it'll all come together. And inwardly, I'm like, Lord, please let it all come together. But really liking that organization. But our postmoderns, they really are very tolerant of things. Whereas moderns like those structure and rules, there's tolerance from our postmodern sisters. As well, our moderns, they like knowledge and power, knowledge and information, but it's a power base for them. So it's a, like, what I know I can use type experience. Our postmoderns really like experiential opportunities. I'll give a brief example of this with a friend of mine. I said earlier, I always feel like I have 1 foot in one camp and 1 foot in the other. And I think that I've just decided I'm going to be a bridge between the two, the moderns and the postmoderns. I have a friend that's a missionary in New York, and she is a modern. And every time I go to New York, I'm like, Kelly, let's go do this. And she's like, no. And these are things like Alice's Teacup and Serendipity and some of these things that you see in movies and stuff. And she has always told me, you're just paying for the experience. And I've told her before, I want the experience. I will pay for the experience. And that's kind of how postmoderns are. They want that experience in life. And so some of them, you look at and you're like, they're older and they're not married and they haven't done this and they haven't done this. And it's because they've gone to go do different experiences that they can say, I traveled Europe with a backpack, or I taught around the world in a tent for a solid year, which they wanted to do. Whereas some of us look at it and we're like, why would you want to do that? But it's something that they can say, I've done that before. That's not a big deal to me. Our postmodern friends really like authenticity. They really value that transparency. Whereas our moderns, they want to be the best role model. It is always best foot forward. That things are perfect and things are always together. And I'll give you an example of this. I mentioned my friend Joyce that discipled me when I was in college. The way Joyce and I did that discipleship relationship is that every Friday for a year and a half, she and I would meet after I had class, and we'd sit down with the Bible, and we would do Bible study together, and we would pray. We did this every Friday, and for about a solid year, every Friday, when I asked her, do you have any prayer requests, she'd always say no, and she would smile, and she'd shake her head, and she'd ask me, and at that point, I was a 20-year-old college student that had like a life that seemed to be falling apart, because I always had like this long list of prayer requests. And every single week, she never had prayer requests. And it really caused me to sit back and think, what is she doing that things are so right that I'm doing that my life is like all messed up, it seems like. And I couldn't figure it out. And I'll never forget, it was April of 2000, that one particular Friday, I asked her, Mrs. Mott, do you have any prayer requests? And her husband had just retired. It was a forced retirement. She and her husband at that point had been married almost 50 years. I think it was 49 years. And he had always worked. And I remember she was across from me at that table, and she looked at me and she burst into tears. And she said, my husband just retired, and he's at home all the time, and he's always underfoot, and I don't know what to do with him, and he's driving me nuts. And she just went on and on and on. And I remember I was like, she had a prayer request. I mean, I always remembered that 16 plus years later, that I just was like, yay. I mean, her life is not good. It's great. But you know why? Because that day, she became a real person to me. She had holes in her wall. She became a real person that had real problems, that her life wasn't perfect either. It was a life dependent upon Christ. And she became real to me. And that is when there was a major just floodgate opening in all the things that I was able to learn from her then, because she realized she didn't have to be perfect. All right, our postmodern friends, where they spend their time is somewhere where they see value. Now, you guys are an anomaly to this tonight, but one of the things that I hear quite frequently is we can't get young people to show up, or their values are just not like ours. I had 2 women from a church in North Carolina that said in my office a couple weeks ago, and they were like, we can't get the young women to come to things. And I was like, okay, so we sat down and we talked, and I said, well, what are you doing, and how are you fostering relationships? We talked a little bit about that, but I said, not speaking on behalf of young people, but wherever they see value, that's where they're going to put their time and their commitment, because time is precious, and you don't get any more than 24 hours in a day. And how you spend those 24 hours, that's it. You're going to put it best where it needs to go. And these ladies that I was talking with, they were like, never thought of it that way before. And I asked them, how are you adding value to the lives of these women, that they can see that, where it's something that they see and it's tangible to them? Flip side of that is our modern friends, who if they make a commitment and they are dying, they are going to honor that commitment. It's not just a matter of, well, it didn't work out for me. I mean, they are going to do something about it and make sure that that commitment is honored. And the last thing in this differing values is spirituality. If you'll notice, they're in both moderns and postmoderns. The difference is how that is reflected. For our modern generation, they grew up in a time wherever the doors were open at the church house, they were there. That meant Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday. If there was anything planned during the week, they were there. However, for our postmoderns, that doesn't mean the same thing. They may believe in God, but it is reflected differently. I have a sweet friend in North Carolina that, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong, what she does 1 week in a month is she gets away and she calls it her retreat with Jesus. And for like 48 hours every weekend, one weekend of every month, she pulls away just to spend time with the Lord. And that means that she skips Sunday morning church so that she can be out by a lake reading her Bible and praying. Now, is that right or wrong? I don't know. I'm not the one to call that one. But that's what she does, and that looks differently than what other people would do. But we certainly don't want to negate the body of Christ, because God put the body together for a reason. With both of these groups, there's some differing challenges as well. I'm going to run through this very briefly. For our postmoderns, they're really skeptical of authority. And sometimes that means there's a lack of trust and a lack of respect. And I kind of equate this, I love history and looking at today's culture and looking at the 1960s and kind of seeing the same thing How many of you grew up in the 60s? You can admit it, you have a tent card in front of you. If you grew up in the 60s, was there a lack of trust during that time? There was government kind of was falling apart, Vietnam was happening and that kind of thing. If you ever hear anything about the baby boomers or study a little bit about them, talks about how there was just this growing lack of trust. Same thing today that we see with our postmoderns. They're very skeptical of authority. Second to that is that they're really overscheduled. I love the postmoderns that I work with, but they crack me up because they come to work occasionally and they're like, I'm just so tired, I don't think I can work today. I'm like, well, what have you been doing? Well, I went to coffee with this friend, and then I went to lunch with this one, I met this one for dinner, and then I'm discipling this one, and they're so overscheduled that they can't do the things that they need to do because their schedules are so full. And that's just one example. But they also live kind of anxiously about things. And they can be morally lax in some places, where kind of anything goes, where once upon a time it was like, we take a stand on this and we'll have a rally for it and we will do this. Okay, let it go, it'll be okay, because they like that tolerance and they like that diversity. They can be very wounded individuals. And also too, something that we see differently today is that sometimes there's coarse language, tattoos, and piercings. And that's just something that to be aware of. But with our moderns, occasionally they can be inflexible. If you know what I mean by that, where it's kind of like, we've always done it this way. Where we can't change that because we've always done it this way. And occasionally I find myself doing that, and I don't know if it's because I'm more modern or I'm just getting older, but somebody said something to me the other day and they were like, well, why do you do this? And I was like, because we've always done it this way. And then I was like, I'm not supposed to be saying these things, but yet I find myself saying these things. So occasionally there can be this inflexibility, but change is not a bad thing at all. Moderns are a very sandwiched generation. They're taking care of aging parents and children at the same time. And for a lot of moderns today, they have adult-age children that are living in the home with them. They went to boomerang children that went to college, graduated, have been educated, and returned to the empty nest to make sure that there were still little birds in there to fill that nest back up. Occasionally, though, moderns can be unavailable. When they hit retirement, they feel their work was done. Or when they do become empty nesters, my time has been served. Thank you. And they shut a little shutter door, and it's like, don't bother me. Gone fishing. Occasionally, they can be insecure and perfectionistic. And they sort of wonder, well, what do I have to offer? Now, bear in mind, I just talked about how the postmodern generation has a high value on education. And sometimes when you see moderns that don't have that kind of education, they're like, what do I have to offer? And some come from divorce backgrounds. Now, ladies, I will tell you, you look at all these different things and you're like, there's this great big mixed bag. And there's actually two bags that have like a whole bunch mixed up in there. But let me ask you a question. As y'all talked around the table tonight, did you find anything in common? Good, okay, good. One of you found something in common. Y'all, we have so much more in common than we have differences. And I think sometimes we focus so much on the differences that we have that we don't bother to look at the commonalities. And we don't look at some of the things that are reality. This morning, and I had an early flight here this morning, and it was like 3:30 in Raleigh when I was curling my hair for the first time today. And the news was playing on the background, and I thought it was really interesting that they were telling about this one movie star that out in Hollywood was having a hard time getting into shows. And so he thought, all right, well, I'm going to walk dogs in order to make extra income to make ends meet. And then he decided, I'm not going to do that because really when you're walking a dog, you're just cleaning up after the dog, and I don't want to do that. So he decided, I'm going to walk humans. And I didn't get to see this, but I was hearing this story. And he began charging $7 for every mile that he would walk a human. And while that sounds so weird, his business has taken off. And it's simply because there are so many people that are lonely today. there are people that want somebody to talk to. And what he said was, you know what, my business is taken off because there are people that are lonely and they need somebody to talk to during the day. And a lot of his business comes from young people that just want somebody to chat with. So it's kind of stuck with me all day. Earlier today, I was looking on Facebook and there was an article from the New York Times that was published yesterday about loneliness and how it's a growing epidemic in Great Britain, and they're having to put government money to it now because it's become a potential health risk. So I started to read the article, and it was about a service that they have set up in Great Britain where people can call in and they can talk to other people. And this one lady that is a listener, I don't remember the proper term given to it, but as a listener, she said, it has been absolutely fascinating for me to hear the stories of some of these people that have called in. She said, I've heard stories of people and really realized how rich their lives are. She said, I've heard stories from people that lived here, grew up in World War II, and talked about how London was bombed. Mind you, this is in Great Britain. She said, things I never ever knew at all. She said, it's been absolutely fascinating. I've learned so much about people. Ladies, if you're younger than 35, I encourage you to look at some of us that are older than 35 and realize one day you'll be that age, hopefully, the Lord willing. For those of us that are older than 36 and older, we can look at people that are younger and think, one day I was there too. I met sweet Brittany over here who thought I was 26, which I really appreciated tonight. But I looked at her and I thought, one day I was her age. And just talking with her tonight, I appreciated her perspectives on different things. But you know, isn't it amazing that as we get to know one another and as we get to learn about one another, we're no longer an age, we're a person with a history, with experiences, and we begin to find things in common instead of things that are different. How much better it is when we work together as sisters in Christ the way that God intended. Earlier this evening, I mentioned about the gymnastics team, the U.S. women's gymnastics team that won gold in Rio. I've thought a lot about this team over the last month because here this team, these 5 young women with a coach in her 70s, very different from one another, all work together to accomplish the goal of reaching a gold medal, something that will perish at the end of time. We strive for a kingdom that is eternal, that is lasting, and that is forever. As sisters in Christ, no matter our age, that is what God desires of us, to work together for a kingdom that is lasting.